What's up, my wizards and witches? Today we're looking at Liches and Fishes. Let's get at it.
They say a man who represents himself has a fool for a client. Well, with God as my witness, I am that fool.
Well, I brought this deck up on Twitter, as the meme goes, about a week ago, and I was surprised by the response at it. People were like, "Oh, be a spicy boy, whip that thing up for us, cuz." So, after about a week of tweaks, I decided to throw the deck into a Patreon poll, see how people were, see if people were into it at all. And it got like way more votes than anything else. So, let's check out this silly, stupid, amazing thing. Now, in case you have no idea what this thing is or what I'm talking about, and you just clicked on the video because you thought the title of the deck was cute or whatever, this is basically a Merfolk deck in which the most important creature isn't a Merfolk. We're going to run 3 copies of Underrealm Lich because he's really what this entire deck is centered around. Now, Lich has been one of the cooler looking cards from Guilds since like the first time we saw it, but so far, it's failed to actually do anything in Guilds of Ravnica Standard. And that's amazing considering Golgari is kind of dominating things for the last week or so here, but it doesn't even fit into those decks. If not those, then where, The card definitely has potential. It was the #1 card on my, Guilds of Ravnica sleeper list, so I have some faith in the card, and there's been a lot of people that have discussed doing degenerate things with it, but it usually starts with like, well, you play opt! And I guess we're trying to go bigger than that, Granddad. So I think that one of the coolest ways that we can get really crazy value off of Lich is to play bodies that also draw us cards. And luckily, there's a whole tribe from Ixalan that does that. Merfolk are really, really good at drawing cards when they enter the battlefield or deal combat damage or whatever. So we have access to a whole suite of amazing Merfolk cards that could go really, really well with Underrealm Lich, and that's kind of the basis for this deck. Once we get a Lich in play, we'll start playing bodies that also let us dig into our deck and get more bodies, play those, draw more cards, dig more into our deck. So once Lich is out, this deck can do some really, really filthy things. In a way, Lich just gives Merfolk the kind of closing power that it never really had before, It allows the deck to, double and even triple spell on, late-game critical turns that the deck wants to get to anyway. Merfolk was never the fastest aggro deck in the format. It routinely gets to, turns 7 and 8, and those are the turns where Underrealm Lich is a really crazy card. You're going to explode onto the board as long as you can make this stick, and that's really easy to do. But we've talked enough about the Liches. Let's look at the Fishes in the deck here, because that's what we're mostly playing. There's 23 Merfolk in this deck, starting with the Silvergill Adept. Silvergill's fine on turn 2, again, 20 plus Merfolk in the deck is plenty enough to almost always draw a card off of this on turn 2. Even in the really rare circumstances where you have to pay full price for this, it's totally fine as long as you have a Lich on the battlefield. You're usually more than willing to do that. As if Merfolk needed more of a reason to play this card. I mean, we're going to play it no matter what anyway, but it's both good before Lich, where it does all the stuff it's always done. It helps you find any lands that you might need, helps you draw into more gas, goes ahead and puts you up on cards even if this trades in combat. That's all amazing for just 2 mana, but it's good after Lich too. So again, we're going to play the card no matter what, but Lich gives us even more of a reason to do so. Now, I am playing 2 Merfolk in the deck that don't actually work with Underrealm Lich at all, but they're just too good to pass up, especially for trying to pad this starting 60 with Merfolk, so we have to play both Merfolk, Branchwalker, and Jadelight Ranger. Jadelight Ranger is the most expensive card in the deck, but you gotta play it. We're trying to find, 20 plus playable Merfolk, and Jadelight Ranger it's the most playable Merfolk in the entire format. This has been popping up an awful lot lately, as has its little sister, Merfolk Branchwalker. In a way, it's funny. You could argue that Merfolk is easily the most successful tribe from Ixalan, even though there hasn't been a Merfolk deck, per se, at the top tables of Standard in over a year. Since the Merfolk have come out. These are still, 2 of the most important cards from all of Ixalan block, So, again, in a way, you could argue that Merfolk have easily been the most impactful tribe, if only because these 2 cards exist. Again, we're looking for good Merfolk, and there really are none better than these 2. But we're going to slip in a couple of copies of Cumin, Tyrant of Araska. We're looking for 3 drops in this deck, and Cumin is obviously a really good one with 20 plus Merfolk around. Now, I'm only going to play 2 because we're drawing so many cards, and in the case of Branchwalker and Jadelight, we're exploring a lot too. So we're seeing enough cards to easily get a copy of Cumin over the game, and I don't really want to see more than 1 copy in most games. But while this is out, this just does everything that the deck wants to do, Just like any Merfolk deck in Standard, at least. This really focuses mostly on board presence, which Cumina, really rewards. Whether we have 3 Merfolk out, her and 2 others, we can start drawing cards. That ability obviously works really, really well with Lich. But obviously, if we get enough Merfolk out, we can just start making them bigger every turn, and that is really, really dangerous. Not to mention she can just make herself unblockable if we have one other Merfolk, which I at least want to bring up. I mean, you can read it, it's printed right there on the card, but sometimes that is startlingly relevant considering this is a really grindy deck and a grindy format for that matter. So we'll get multiple turns with an unblockable Cumina, and that does make a difference. But the Merfolk that I was most excited about playing with is actually one that's never ever been in a Merfolk list ever in the history of its life. And that is Riverwise Augur. This is a mostly forgotten card, and it wouldn't surprise me if you had to read it. So there. It's basically a brainstorm on legs for 4 times the mana, but you do get a 2/2 body out of it. And usually that's still not quite worth it. Even though the enter the battlefield trigger is outrageous, having brainstorm on a stick is just crazy. I don't feel like I have to argue that that's crazy. That should be obvious. But in this deck, it makes it absurd and actually worth playing, because if you actually have a Lich out, you play Riverwise Augur, you get to see 9 cards. 9 cards. I actually cut for a second to think about how I wanted to phrase this next thing, but I think I'm just going to keep repeating 9 cards over 9 cards. It's crazy, and getting ostensibly the best 3 out of those and pitching a couple back to the top of your library is crazy. And remember, you get to dump a bunch of them into your graveyard too, which we can make value out of that in this deck. So Riverwise is definitely worth playing in here, even if it's not worth playing in just about any other deck, since it's been in Standard. This is definitely the deck that abuses it the most. It's absolutely disgusting as long as you have a Lich out. This will win the game in some cases because you get the best cards from the top 9 of your library. It's like a dig through time on legs. I don't even have to keep talking about this card, but I should hammer home just how crazy this card is in the deck. It's one of the whole reasons to want to play Merfolk Underrealm Lich, is to abuse this card as much as you possibly can. And this deck definitely does that, but it also abuses Seafloor Oracle pretty well. Again, 23 Merfolk in this deck, and we're swinging kind of a lot if we can get away with it, So even just this and Cumina, tap your Seafloor Oracle, make your Cumina unblockable, get in, draw your card, or if you have a Lich out, look at the top 3 cards and pick the best, So if you have any combination of those cards out, it just gets absolutely ridiculous. And of course, on those turns where you're swinging in and you're going to get through with 2, 3 Merfolk, the card is busted. The card is busted regardless of whether or not you have a Lich out. But if you do, it's crazy. It's just off the rails. But I am saving some room for some fun-ups because I can't help myself. I mean, this is obviously a fun deck more than anything else. So if I have the opportunity to play a couple of dumb cards as one of, I'm going to do it. So with that in mind, I'm going to play 1 copy of Tatyova and 1 copy of Tishanna. I grow weary of telling you that each card in the deck is a combo with Underrealm Lich, but obviously these are nuts with Underrealm Lich. I also have to keep coming up with adjectives for almost broken, but not quite. But sometimes, just like Oracle and Riverwise Augur, these can be, even on those turns where you just draw extra lands. Tatyova is great if you have a Lich out, and sometimes fine even if you don't, but obviously you have a Lich out, Tatyova is crazy, but Tishanna, you guys, if you need extra lands to actually get to her mana cost, it's not super hard to do, and once you get there and you have a few extra cards in your hand, which is obviously not super hard to do in this deck because every other thing draws cards, then Tishanna is just, she ends games. I was going nuts about Riverwise Augur letting you look at the top 9, but if you have enough cards in your hand, or creatures on the battlefield, then Tishanna can just end up, looking at the top 15 cards of your library and getting you all the best cards in your entire deck. So Tishanna sometimes ends games just kind of by herself, even without a card like Underrealm Lich. But again, this is just another example, both of these are, of cards that are somewhat playable in the right Merfolk build, but just made absolutely freaking sane by the fact that we're playing Lich in the deck. Again, there is no feeling, even if you ultimately end up losing the game, which is really tough to do in this scenario, but there is really no feeling like Underrealm Lich being in play and actually getting that Tishanna down. It's unbelievable. You've won F&M even if you don't win another game the whole night. Now that's 26 total creatures, which does leave a little bit of room for some spells. We can mess around here, so I'm going to include 3 copies of Necrotic Wound in the deck, which is not necessarily ideal, I know, but I'm trying to kind of keep the budget down as much as we can, even knowing that we have to build a 3-color mana base and like Jade Light Ranger's $10. I still don't want this deck to be like $300, $200 even, so I'm trying to keep the budget down. You could play Assassin's Trophy here, I guess, if you wanted to do that, but Necrotic Wound is fine, usually starting on like turn 4, turn 5. This can take out even relatively big stuff if you've been able to do some trading in combat, or even just against the control deck. You know, they'll play a creature or two here and there, sometimes a Crackling Drake or a Dream Eater, you know. And this can be surprisingly effective against them, too. You know, it's only 1 mana, so it doesn't really interrupt our Lich turns. You know, when we're trying to go off and play multiple Merfolk in a turn, this is just 1 mana to stop off and exile that guy forever. And it's usually really good if we've been able to get a turn or 2 in with Lich. So later on in the game, it allows us to have these like double and triple spell turns where it's really good, but it's not great, obviously, in the first few turns of the game. And a removal piece like Cast Down even might be a better call, but we're dumping so many creatures into the graveyard in the mid to late-ish game that I really like the play on a card like Necrotic Wound, where we can get it in and still play other spells, you know. Again, like Vraska's Contempt might be worth it to you, but Necrotic Wound has a lot of synergy on turn 5 or 6. But I have no similar reservations about playing Charter Course. This card is obviously in the deck, I think, you know, and I've thought about waffling going down to 2 a little bit, but this does help fill out our curve a little bit in the 2-drop slot. This gives us 11 total cards we can play on turn 2. I think that's important because you don't mind it on turn 2 a lot of the times. This is something else, though, that also lets us double spell on kind of mid-game critical turns, 4, turn 5, things like that. And we will be attacking a lot on those turns, especially depending on what we're up against, in which case, Charter Course is just 2 mana for 2 cards. But obviously, with things like Necrotic Wound in the deck, you don't necessarily mind pitching creatures into the graveyard in the early game if you have to play this on turn 2. And obviously, once we get Lich out, say this with every card in the deck, but once we get Lich out, the card is just absurd. Absolutely dumb. It's a stupid card, but it's kind of a stupid card no matter when we choose to cast it, whether or not we've attacked or whether or not we have really any creatures at all. It's a very good card, you guys. So I'm going to play 3 copies of Charter Course, and I'm not going to be sorry about it. It's a fine piece of cardboard. But we need a couple of like finishing moves here. You know, we need a way to really put the game away once we actually get to those turns where we're like, okay, Underrealm Lich, play a Merfolk, look at the top 3, play a Merfolk, look at the top 3, play a Merfolk. You know, sometimes we can end the game just by sheer numbers in that case. But sometimes, especially against these grindy, you know, Golgari decks, it's a very mid-range format right now. We need to be able to just really have like one last big punch, a haymaker, that, you know, swings the game in our favor. We've got a couple of ways of doing that, even on a relative budget. They're pretty powerful. So I'm going to start with Song of Frail Eyes, which we're playing 2 copies of. Now, if you're looking to not spend that much money on a finisher, you can do a lot worse than Song of Frail Eyes. It's a great card on a relative budget right now, you know. For a couple of turns, this lets all of the Merfolk that we play let us play more Merfolk. That's hard to say. Merfolk. But this just lets us, you know, tap the Merfolk we've been playing to play even more Merfolk and extend those Lich turns as much as possible. That's really, really good. And then when it does go off, it rewards us playing all those Merfolk. By letting us get in this guilt-free attack step, it'll sometimes just end the game. So Song of Frail Eyes is good pretty much in all of its stages, but you usually don't play it on turn 2. There are times where you play it on turn 3, tap your 2-drop, and play another 2-drop. It's a possibility, but in most cases, you're going to be playing this after you've had a Lich turn or 2, and you just got this board full of Merfolk, but you still can't quite get through for the kill, and this really helps you do that just a couple of turns down the road. And in the meantime, you can use your extra mana to play more Merfolk. I said it right that time. But we also want to play 2 copies of Find Finality in this deck, which is ending up in a lot of decks. It's all the rage these days. It's a pretty in vogue card for the Golgari decks, and it does a lot of the same stuff for us that it does in those decks. First of all, Find Half. Very good. The first half of this card is much better than a lot of people judged it upon release or during spoiler season, you know. Later on in the game, this is a really, really grindy half. It just lets you get card advantage out of your graveyard for just 2 mana. And in our deck, we're playing mostly creatures with value. You know, enter the battlefield triggers to let us draw cards or explore. So the Find half is really, really valuable to us. Because not only is it card advantage that gets us, you know, bodies on the field, helps us get a little resiliency in the late game, you know, and that really really helps against just about everything in the format right now. But the creatures that we get back will provide even more value for us. So Find in and of itself is great, but Finality is a really good like trademark maneuver. This is, we'll get the 3 count off of Finality a lot, depending on what situation we put ourselves in. If we just have, Underrealm Lich get the counters and survive, then sometimes that's good enough. But there are some situations where you've been able to use Cumin to put a couple of counters on all of your Merfolk, and just about all of your creatures survive a Finality, in which case you win. Now here's the mana base here. We're playing 24 lands, which actually seems a land too much, but I have done some budget building with the mana base here. There are definitely concessions we're making. There's no Watery Grave. You'll note the Evolving Wilds, which is the budget builder's best friend. This is the worst fetch land ever printed, but also the best fetch land in Standard. You want to put it that way. So if we need any given color of mana, especially on turn 1, which is a mostly free turn for our deck anyway, then Evolving Wilds is actually a really good card. Need that blue mana for a Silvergill on turn 2? Turn 1 Evolving Wilds got your back, kid. So I actually don't mind playing Wilds so much, given that we don't have any 1-drops. But a pretty effective mana base here. But if you had the money, you could add Woodland Cemeteries, Drowned Catacombs, Watery Graves to your heart's desire. Now here's the sideboard, and there is some budget stuff I'm doing here, but luckily, a lot of the budget cards that we want to play anyway. We want to play Negate, that's 5-10 cents right now, and Negate is just really good in the control matchup for forcing through important plays, so that's a no-brainer, we'll play that. But there's also Wild Growth Walker, which is only 25-35 cents right now, depending on what vendor you get it through on TCG Player, and it's a really important card. We're actually seeing Wild Growth Walker do the work that all of the budget people knew it could do the whole time. I've known a lot of people on the Black-Green Explorer deck for like a year now, and we've all been talking about how good Walker is, and suddenly everyone else in Standard is catching up to what we've all known for a year. Wild Growth Walker is a really important card right now in Standard at the moment, and that's because it's absurd with all these Explorer guys. We're not playing like Seeker's Squire or anything in the deck, but just the fact that we're playing Branch Walker and Jade Light makes Walker, an insane card if we get it on turn 2 in the aggro matchups. We really need some help in that matchup, and Walker is more help than you might think it is. This card is unbelievable and has been for a year. Everybody else is just catching on. I've also got Moment of Craving in there against the aggro match, just to extend the game a little bit, take out a small creature, give us a little bit of life. We want to get into the mid-game if we can possibly help it. And really our best turns are turns like 6 and 7, so we got to get there. This is Moment of Craving. Merman of Craving. Hilarious. Moment of Craving is for that. But we've also got Price of Fame in there, mostly against these Angels decks, where they play like nothing but Legends on their top end. This is a really good card that I'm surprised more people haven't picked up in their board, but we have seen a major trend towards green and black in the last week in the format. Less people are on these, red-white lists. So it's not too surprising this card hasn't popped up, but if red-white is a factor in your local meta, Price of Fame is actually a really, really good card in that matchup, and it just kills anything if you're willing to spend the 4 mana. That's not bad sometimes. Now, before we get to the power rankings, I just want to bring up a couple of ideas for the deck and such, like we've been doing lately. A lot of these are relatively budget, but I at least want to point them out. Like we could play either Beast Whisperer or, more likely, Vanquisher's Banner, kind of port these over from the standard Elves deck that I'm pretty interested in covering, just to let you know. That deck looks hilarious, and it's mostly because of these 2 cards being in the deck at the same time. And we could play either one. I especially think Vanquisher's Banner might be a good 1 or 2 of inclusion, but you might even play all 4. There's also Izoni and Muldrotha. These are decent choices, I would imagine. Izoni probably breaks open stalemates in the late game, but Lich is kind of what we're hoping does that anyway. So I'm not sure Izoni goes in, but if you're looking for another Undergrowth payoff, it's probably somewhat worth it. And then Muldrotha, obviously, pretty crazy with Lich. If we go Lich into Muldrotha and delay actually doing anything with Lich by a turn, then our turn 7 will be super crazy. I was going to say Lit. I am old. I'm an old man, and I was about to say Lit. Word hasn't been popular for a year anyway, but the turns are really good if you have both of those cards out at the same time, obviously. And here are your power rankings right here. A final score of 60 points, which isn't the highest score in the world, but the deck is only about $1.50 right now. I mean, $150, not $1.50. That's too good to be true. But most of that is in Jade Light Rangers and random dual lands. Lich is like $5. There's a couple of things in the deck that cost a little bit of money, but I tried to do as much as I could for you to not make this deck cost $300. It's a lot of fun to play. You probably have a good bit of the pieces already, We're relatively versatile because we draw all the cards. That also helps our consistency. Most of our bodies draw cards. There's nothing wrong with that. And again, I'll say for the probably 80th time in this video, if you made a drinking game out of this, you'd be blacked out by now. But in a deck that has Underrealm Lich, all of our, bodies that draw cards are just stellar. Crazy, ridiculous cards that help us take over a game. Especially once we do get Lich down, we have enough mana to double and triple spell. We're seeing so many cards that it takes over a game. There's not much that a whole lot of decks can do about that, even though the deck does not play a ton of powerful creatures or anything. We're in a really grindy format right now, and the more green-black dominates the format for the next week or so until we figure it out and Control takes over. It's probably what's going to happen. But until that does happen, it's a really grindy, mid-rangey format that goes relatively deep into games, and we can take advantage of that really well. This format, it's not too uncommon to see turn 7, turn 8, Not too many people are playing aggro. They're turning away from it. So we get into these long slogs of games, and if we can get to turn 7 or 8 in this deck, we're having a good time. But history says you're probably going to win the game, because if you're playing, 3 fish in the same turn, and you're getting value off of each of them when you play them, that kind of value town strategy is really, really good right now, and we don't have to wait until we draw Golgari Finebreaker or whatever to actually get our value. All of our creatures have that kind of value on them, so it's just unbelievable. Try the thing out. It snowballs. Once you actually do get the ball rolling, it's a freaking crazy thing. I know it takes a couple of turns to get there, but as long as you're not in like a heavy aggro meta, again, you should be afforded the turns necessary to make it to that point in the game. And once you do, you just haven't, again, there is no way you could possibly have more fun in Standard, unless you're doing something crazy with Experimental Frenzy. But barring that, that's kind of what this deck feels like. Not a bad comparison. So if you're interested in trying the thing out, now I hope you are. It's a pretty wild ride. It's about 150 on TCG Player right now. I already mentioned that. Tried to do as much as I could to keep the budget down, but there are obvious ways that if you had the money, you could make this deck even better. I'm telling you, it's not actually a bad choice in this particular format. So give it a try. If you've always wanted to play Merfolk and see it be a viable deck, I think you could actually do way worse than this. It's a fun deck, and it actually has some power behind it too. Once you get to Value Town, you're going to win the game a lot of the time. So give this thing a shot. Click the first link in the description if you want to check out the deck list, get any pieces from my sponsors at TCG Player. They not only help me keep the lights on around here, they do well for you, boy, but they're also the cheapest place you're going to get this thing. And I really don't want you to overpay for it. So order it from them. Click the link in the description. And I guess with that, I'm tapped out. I'm just as surprised as you there weren't more fish puns in this video, but this deck actually turned out to be more serious than I thought it was going to be. I thought this was going to be a nothing but jokes video, blah, blah, fish things. Do you like fish sticks and all that? But it turned out that I actually had a lot more to say about the strategy behind this deck than I initially anticipated. So, again, give it a shot. But in the meantime, do all the YouTube stuff. Like the video if you haven't done it yet. It actually means more to me than I let on. So, like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done it yet. And get over to Patreon if you haven't done that yet either. Because if you want to participate in the kind of polls that result in me having to do ridiculous decks like this, then it only costs $1 a month to get in, cast your vote, and I'll let you know what decks we're doing the day before we do them. Lots of good value for $1. So just go over there and throw me a Washington, and you can help vote on stupid decks. And good decks, for that matter. Do a lot of stuff over there, but in any case, I'm pretty sure I'm done for this one, so take to the comments section and let me know how you felt about this ridiculous thing, because I feel better about it than I thought I was going to initially. Again, this thing was just a passion project stupid thing I was going to have fun with, but it turned into a decent deck, so give it a shot if you can, proxy it up if you must. It's a fun deck to play, but with that, pretty sure I'm done, you guys. So I'll see you on Friday. I'm Dev from The Place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love and be kind.